I can go into a room that is devoid of any sensory input. So it's dark, it has no sound, it has no TV, no magazines, it has nothing in there. There is nothing for me to absorb and collect information from. Yet I can go into that room and an hour later I can come out seemingly knowing more than I did when I went in. And I go, where's that coming from? What is happening there that I have more information than when I went in, when there's nothing physical giving me any information? You know, that tells me, oh, there's something here. There's something that we're accessing. I don't know what that is, but it does seem like, again, for thousands of years, we all thought this too.
Holy mackerel, that can't be our craft. There actually is a large unidentified object circling the Earth at incredible speed.
Naturally, we're very curious to know where it is you come from.
In the UFO content space, it's getting crowded, it's getting noisy. In that space, there's a handful of creators that have cut through, and I think the one that's cut through, the biggest signal to me anyway, is Area 52 and Chris Ramsay. Today we have Chris Ramsay on. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so let me back up here a little bit. A few years ago, Area 52 pops into my feed, and I'm looking, and I'm like, that looks really interesting. Click on it, and a couple things struck me. I'm watching you, and I'm going, so the production value, the editing, the stage aesthetics, Chris's aesthetic with the tie and the cool beard. He's a gifted interviewer. He's doing these read-throughs, and he's talking in some of these nostalgic cases and the B-roll. I'm like, this is amazing. This is absolutely amazing. Then the second thing that struck me was, where the hell did this guy come from? It was like he just rolls up, and all of a sudden it's like, did they pull someone from Showtime or Netflix and say, listen, top guy, we need you to go ahead and create a YouTube channel, and you just roll up. So what I did was a little research, and I found that he had a channel called Chris Ramsay, and this channel had been around since, I think, 2011, if I'm not mistaken. And he's a gifted magician and puzzling. And oh, by the way, that channel has over 7 million subscribers. So I'm like, okay, he's a gifted, top-notch content creator. And that'll lead me to where we're going to start. How does someone get into magic and puzzling, top of the food chain with content creation, and then shift and push all in on a UFO channel?
Yeah, thank you. I would argue that it wasn't, for me, it felt like a natural transition. And although, looking at the two channels, you might obviously see some glaring differences, but magic has always sort of permeated the puzzle realm, but also this UFO or phenomenon space or psi space for many obvious reasons and overlaps. And for me, the number one thing in this transition was I wanted a creative outlet to be able to express myself creatively about the things I'm passionate about. That's really all it's ever been, whether it's magic or whether it's puzzles or whether it's now this. I started uploading tutorials and vlogs and that type of thing around the magic world. And when I felt like creatively I was kind of at an end, or at least, getting a little bit, it was growing tiresome a little bit creatively to be able to produce content and that type of thing. I decided, well, let's shift into this adjacent world, which is puzzles. And as a magician, all you're doing is solving puzzles. You're reverse engineering how things work. You're given an effect, which is like the trick, and you have to come up with a method using, hundreds of years of literature and methods that amazing, great magicians have, created before me. And we have to use that and try and create the magic. And so when I saw a puzzle box, I was like, oh, this is just a magic trick waiting to be figured out. But you're also encouraged to figure it out, which is kind of the opposite of a magic trick. And you're allowed to. And so it was a lot of fun. And it got me a whole wider audience because it appealed to more people, which was great financially. Obviously, it helps out with the views and everything else. Also great creatively because we were able to create these really cinematic introductions to every one of these sort of mundane objects had these really crazy storyboards and production go into it. And that's where I thrived. That's what I really enjoyed more so than the puzzle solving. And that eventually as well came to a part where I'm like, I'm just kind of tired of doing this giant production for an inanimate object that really isn't fulfilling my soul in any way, only creatively a little bit, but I felt it was stagnating. And I had gone through, it was a rough period, believe it or not, for me. As a creative person, I yearn for that type of thing. Otherwise, I begin to spiral and I begin to go downhill. So I found it was through a friend of mine, Nelson Dellis, who is a memory athlete. He was a 6-time U.S. memory champion, and him and I had become friends. I had learned some memory techniques for magic purposes, and he had confided in me one day that, he asked me, was I aware of remote viewing? And I kind of knew what he was talking about. I was like, like the psychic spy stuff. But as a magician, I'm highly skeptical and dubious of this stuff. And he goes, so this hedge fund kind of hired me to learn how to remote view the stock market for them. And I went, hold on, what?
What?
And so I spent the next year remote viewing every day and documenting that journey. And then I had all this footage afterwards. And I thought to myself, like, if you're a hedge fund, like that's numbers. There's got to be something to this. This isn't just like the woo. We're talking people with money, serious money, thinking this is real. I'm like, there has to be something. There's numbers here. There's a metric. And so, after a year, I had stockpiled this footage and, said to myself, if I put this out on my magic channel, no one's going to buy it. No one's going to want to see this. They're all very skeptical magicians. And, there's the James Randys of the world and they're going to say, no, this isn't real. They won't even hear out the argument. And so I said, heck with it. I'm going to start a new channel. And then the idea started coming about the vision of the channel and then started building that. And that's how I got that start.
Wow. And I mean, it wasn't on your things to do list. It just evolved. It sounded like from almost born out of necessity for your creativity.
Yeah, it felt that way. It felt very synchronous. And it was providing me with a totally different creative outlet for a subject that I was really interested in since a young age.
Yeah.
And especially the UFO stuff.
Yeah. Were you one of those? Well, I was a kid. I'm older than you, but In Search Of was my first. Leonard Nimoy In Search Of was my first. It just grabbed me. And I'm kind of a hyper youngest of 8, ADD, we're all wild, and that show would come on and I would not miss it. And then Unsolved Mysteries was a big one for me too, that I just loved everything about that show. Did you have any influences like that?
Yeah, Unsolved Mysteries was a big one for me as well.
Yeah.
I would tune in whenever I could. The eerie music always creeped me out, learning about things like spontaneous combustion and cryptids, and definitely X-Files was another big one for me. And then there was a movie that was the genesis of my curiosity, which was Fire in the Sky.
Yeah.
And I was 9 years old, and my older brother would watch horror movies with me all the time. And, one of the perks or downfalls, I guess, of having an older brother is, getting to watch like Leprechaun and Freddy and all of these things with him. And then he put this on, and I'm watching this. And at the beginning of the movie, there's a title that goes, this is based on a true story.
Yeah.
And so now I'm being told by an adult in the room that aliens are real, essentially. And I wasn't given any satisfactory reasoning or answer for why they did what they did, where they came from, where they went to afterwards. It was this sort of, I was just kind of left to my own devices thinking what happened here? How come we're not talking about what happened here? They're trying to prove whether or not it happened with this guy, but they're not talking about the thing. And I'm like, these are things that are coming and going from somewhere, taking us. Like, what's going on here? And so that always left a mark on me. And I think that that's where my curiosity really stemmed from, is like, this is the most important thing in the world to me now.
Yeah.
as far as, a kid goes, and you're telling me this is real, but yet you're also just moving on with your life. And that really, it really bugged me, I think, at a young age.
Yeah, I can't say I was any different. The first time we walked into the library, my dad was in the Air Force, right? We're in Malmstrom Air Force Base when the nukes got shut down. But of course, never knew until Robert Salas and the Freedom of Information Act in the 90s. But we were in Alaska, all these funky places. So we go bebopping into the library, and I'm in kindergarten. And the first book I see that I gravitate towards is I think it's Monsters, Mysteries, and Legends. And it had all of that in there. And from that point on, it just, same with you. I'm like, why aren't we talking about this every day, all day? This is crazy. Well, I'm certainly glad we all are that you made the jump. So I want to get into it a little bit with that transition that we just discussed. So from that point to now, how has your perception of the phenomena changed?
Oh, greatly. I think greatly. I think when you embark on this journey, although reluctant, you're kind of open-minded and happy to think, okay, maybe there is life out there somewhere, and perhaps it has visited us. That's kind of the extent. Most people aren't even willing to go that far.
Yeah.
But then once you get past that barrier, you start looking at what is visiting. What are these patterns that we're seeing? Whether it's the saucers or the beings themselves, or the abductions, or people getting beamed, or whatever it may be. And that, for a long time, I was really resigned to thinking, oh, there's multiple things happening. There's multiple things. It seems like it isn't just an isolated event with one type of thing.
Yeah.
There could be a multitude of things. And I was really happy about that for a long time. And I think the more I learn, the more I'm open to the idea, at least, that this phenomenon might sort of, I don't know, it might be interacting with our consciousness in a way that makes it instantiate in whatever form we need it to. And I know that sounds weird and strange, but it's also where the greatest researchers have sort of concluded their journeys. Whether it's Jacques Vallée, or even I had Grant Cameron recently come on, after 50 years of looking into this stuff, he's convinced of that too, and makes some great arguments. The fact that no two grays look exactly alike. They're wearing different clothing. Some of them aren't wearing clothing, and some of them have mouths, some of them don't. And either we're dealing with 100,000 species,
right,
or maybe there's there's a unifying theory here that might explain every encounter since, antiquity.
It was leading into an observation I was going to make that I had, and you just articulated it. I'll give you a couple of examples. Chris Bledsoe, you've known Chris and been there. I've known Chris for about 7 years. I had Emily on the show and wanted to, through her 10-year-old eyes to now, her experience with it, and Chris Jr. is going to come on. But when Emily and I were talking, I brought up the Jacques Vallée thing, and she also was a firm believer in the phenomenon will interact with you based off of maybe where you are in a number of ways, whether it's emotionally, consciously, belief system-wise, and to kind of bring that example into view, she talked about, for her, she walked in, and where her dad normally sat, there was a basketball-sized green orb right above his chair. And with her mom saw the orb, then Emily sees a flash of light, but 3 light beings. And then the 3 light beings go, but they kind of see somewhat different perspectives of the same event. Or in the Roswell era to the 50s, it was craft. It was always flying saucers, and that was in the front of our consciousness. And I know you're a nostalgia buff, and that's always been my wheelhouse. So I was going to ask you, to that end, the presentation of the phenomenon, and I'll use a year. I'll use a year as an example. 1973, here in the States. And I wrote down a few dates just to kind of drive the point home. So the center point, I think, is the Pascagoula abduction case, right? But that was October 11th. In Giles, Mississippi, and I talked to some people there, or excuse me, Giles, Tennessee, on October 1st, they had a report, multiple reports starting in September, culminating with an egg-shaped craft and a hairy creature walking out of the craft. Then you go to the Falkville, Alabama Tin Man, which was October 17th, where the officer takes a Polaroid and
gets chased by this being, or chases the being as well.
Right. You know what's interesting is I found an interview online somewhere, and I think it was in the 90s. Someone was interviewing him. It was just an unheard, buried archival one, and he talks about his house got broken into 10 years from the day that this happened, and he had kept 3 things from that incident: his shotgun, his sidearm, and the Polaroid. And it was clear somebody had broken into his house and nothing was taken except those 3 items, which of the 2 he had stashed. And he said that was very odd, right? The Coin helicopter episode in Ohio was literally the day after the Falkville Tin Man. Chestnut Ridge was October 25th, I believe, where a family sees a light coming down in the field. Light comes down, field's illuminated. 2 Bigfoot-like creatures are walking along the fence line, shoot it with tracer bullets. He immediately gets these crazy thoughts. He smells sulfur. He's acting like an animal. The sheriff comes out, and the sheriff's report said the field was still illuminated, and he could read a newspaper by the light of the field. Right? So these happen within, hundreds of miles of each other, within days of each other, with no 24/7 news cycle to maybe, rural areas. So it kind of goes into that. Does the phenomena present itself in stages? And that's new. Like, those were new things. This humanoid, these cryptids had never really been associated with it. Now you're getting hairy cryptids and these other tin cryptids all associated within an area within really days of each other. And I didn't know if you think it goes along the same lines of the phenomena presenting something in a certain way, and why? Why would it do that?
Yeah, it definitely feels that way when you look at all the information. You can only connect dots. The other option is that somehow these different species and creatures and craft all, for some reason, appeared in the same area around the same time. Which is more likely? Both are very unlikely, I'll tell you that. But the former seems to be, this unifying theory of, perhaps there is some type of, well, first of all, the motive we don't know. That what if we had the motive, it might explain everything. But we don't have that motive, so we can just assume, and then we're given clues through, genetic alterings, through cattle mutilation, through being told the world's going to end. Like, we have to piece together the motive. So it's been kind of aloof. However, if you look at the fact that all of these were distinctly kind of very different and very, it seems like whatever it is we're noticing, and again, from antiquity, is right on the other side of what we know. Not so far that we couldn't recognize it, but it seems to instantiate wherever we know it, right past that threshold. And so if you look at in the late 1800s, there was these sightings of this giant airship that was going like 11 miles an hour. It wasn't traveling as fast as a fighter jet or a UFO for that matter, but it was traveling in the air, which was unheard of. And it looked like, some type of thing that you could concoct back then. And so it always seems like it's just past that. And I asked myself, what's that reason for? Why would it show up in that way? And I guess the only explanation that I could conjure up would be to expand our our awareness of consciousness or our sort of curiosity a little bit more. And much in the same way, if you lift weights, you're tearing muscle to build up new muscle, and kind of you're always expanding that boundary bit by bit by bit by bit. And if you go too far ahead, you're not expanding anything, you're just causing confusion. And so it seems like there's this slight expansion happening, and they usually happen around eras when the collective reasoning is funneled into a singular idea, whether that's science and we're sort of rounding out the edges of, physics, or whether that's just religion or whatever it may be. It seems like as soon as we're rounding off those sharp edges and nothing novel is happening, that's when these things tend to happen in clusters, which then creates, an open mind, and it creates more curiosity. And not to go too deep into this, but if I was running some type of model, let's say, because we do have that now as a reference, we have AI. Yeah. But if I was running some type of model and I had a little, person in my desktop, and, it was like a little blender reality, and he was just wandering around. He thinks that's the world, right? And I write some code, and I upload this into his mind, and the code is like, build a statue. And now he gets this epiphany, right? And he goes, I think I'll build a statue today. He thinks that might be divine, or it might be inspiration, maybe a muse. He doesn't know where it comes from, but he knows that, he has this information, and that like he has a real, he wants to make this happen. It's all he can think about. He's kind of passionate about it for some reason. And then he ends up building the statue with his little hands, and it's imperfect. It's not great, but he's learning, and the model is learning, but the model isn't learning very fast. It takes him a while to build this statue with his little hands, and he's, kind of one thing at a time. So to increase the speed of the learning in this model, maybe I have a separate window open on another screen where I built a beautiful statue that's absolutely pristine and perfect by every metric. It's, it's geometrically pristine. And I just drag and drop it into, and it just appears, boop, and it drops down, poof, in the sand. And he goes, where did this come from? What is the purpose of this? And he starts measuring it, and he goes, this is impossible. This is so perfect. It's impossible that it's this perfect. We could never make this. But now, all of a sudden, he's making statues using this as a template, and his curiosity is piqued. His model is learning more rapidly. It's increasing. And so maybe that's what's happening. Maybe these things are being dumped into our reality to help this learning model, which we're a part of, expand itself. And maybe that instead of information, it's consciousness that we're sort of mining collectively. And, by keeping our minds individualized, we're effectively, if you're them, you're looking at 7 billion individual civilizations.
Yeah.
In a universe where everything communicates telepathically, this is a gold mine for consciousness mining. And, maybe that's it. Maybe so everything is just there to sort of have us branch out and increase our collective knowledge at an expanding rate. I don't know. It's an interesting thought that I've been pondering on.
I love it. I love your little guy on the desktop analogy. It works. It works.
It does, yeah.
So for you in this journey, what has left a bigger impression on you? And if you're like me, you talk to people, and the picture for me starts to form, and the considerations get bigger. And sometimes I think I know so much less about what I thought I knew before because of these other considerations. And you talked about it. It's almost like the cultural, and I think about this too, the cultural touch points of the 40s and 50s with the flying saucer and War of the Worlds. That's kind of what we ended up seeing. Or in the 70s, Bigfoot was becoming this big cultural thing, and now people are seeing a hairy creature associated with it. Emily brought the point up too, like orbs were a thing. I mean, the Foo Fighters in World War II, but now the orbs seem to be everywhere, right? And that's been brought to the edge of our consciousness now, in our consciousness. So it kind of makes me wonder what's next. And have you been more impacted, or what's left a bigger impression on you? Has it been the experiencers you've met, or the former military, or what classification of guest? I wouldn't say just guests, because you actually do events, and by extension, you meet a lot of people in this field. What's left? Is there any one person that's left a bigger impression on you?
As far as, I think they've all left a really big impression on me, but in terms of data collecting, it's all equally valuable. Whether you think someone is full of it,
right,
or, whether you think you hold them in high conviction that they're telling the absolute truth, I think that information is valuable regardless, because you have to understand where it comes from and how, information is being transmitted and how it gets skewed. And so it's all valuable, but I would say that, I got to meet Bob Lazar.
Yeah.
And, as a bit of a Bob Lazar, self-admittedly a Bob Lazar fanboy, many people in ufology, have some type of Bob Lazar shrine at home or in their office. And, I'm guilty of the same. And, being able to meet with him and just talk to him candidly, my conviction level grew pretty high. It was already pretty high, but it definitely increased. He's more genuine off camera because of his reluctance to want to be on camera. He doesn't like the camera. He's not an influencer or a content creator, far from it. He does not like the spotlight at all. He gets very nervous around it. And so his demeanor actually changes the second the cameras are off. He's dealt with a lot of backlash and stuff. So he's very careful with the words he chooses, because he knows people are just going to come yelling at him for everything. Yeah. And so he just wants to tell his story, and that's it. But when you get him off camera and you begin to talk to this guy, you just realize, first of all, he's just a guy, he's a nice person. And with all the BS detection that I've been able to accumulate through my career, I think he's telling the truth, and so for me, that was a big one. That was a big one to, meet him. And I got to meet Travis Walton as well. And Travis was a harder read for me because, 50 years telling the same story, you do fall into script.
Yeah.
Automatically. I think anyone would. And so it was harder for me to get Travis to veer from that story and give us new, novel sort of information. And to his credit, he's just been asked all the questions. Do you know what I mean? He's probably just sick and tired of talking about this, and I can't blame him. But Bob was a little different, because Bob has a curiosity.
Yeah.
That I didn't see within Travis. Travis kind of has his own ideas of why and who and where and all this. Bob really doesn't. He doesn't hold on to anything. He doesn't speculate. He doesn't exaggerate. He doesn't like doing any of that stuff. And so, but one thing he is he's curious for truthful information. And so you can really tell that when you say something that he wasn't aware of from an account that you believe to be true, his ears perk up. Yeah. Because now he's sort of fitting the pieces of the puzzle, completing the crossword. You're giving him another letter, and he gets excited about that. And so just things like that are very small, increase my conviction about, at the very least, that he is telling the truth as he knows it. Yeah.
No, that was Luigi, by the way. Luigi's film comes out
yes,
in
April 3rd.
Days. Yeah, and he's going to be on April 10th on the show. So
yeah. Good movie.
Yeah, that's what I heard Jesse talking about it, you talking about it. So we're excited to have him on. You brought something up, and we were talking about it. Maybe the perception or preconceived notion that people have about the phenomena, and And now I'll go into some of the experiencers that are on the other side of it. And that, I guess for me, I'll get your thoughts on it, but for me, it's a little harder to reconcile them having an idea, and that idea, whether it's formed by culture, whether it's formed by their belief system or external cultural TV. I've met people and stayed, one home in particular, where the family was torn apart. Literally, they got a divorce, and I got the ex-wife and the adult children to come sit down in a room, and they didn't want to be on camera, but they would talk. And the dad, who's the center figure of these, I guess, Chris, you would call it abduction, but it didn't fit into a box. The phenomenon they experienced in their home, and then he moved out in a smaller home, and it still happens there, is such a range of stuff that you wouldn't make up to be associated with this phenomena. It's just the craziest stuff. And so, like you, I'm measuring, and my bullshit meter when I'm talking to him is one thing. So I really wanted to meet the family and get a sense from them. And when I meet with her, she's very reluctant. She doesn't like talking about this. And she starts crying. And when they're together, they are a loving couple. I'm like, I just said I had to ask, like, you look like you love each other. They're like, we do. I'm like, why are you not together? And she said, they don't want us to be together. They didn't want us to have kids. We adopted our kids. We couldn't have kids. When I ask her when it became real for her, and she's talking about, we move into this big, beautiful new house, and I'm trimming the bushes, and this alien face comes up that looks almost like a traditional gray, but not quite. Appears in the bushes. I think I've ingested some kind of toxic plant. They're seeing it. She sees it in the bathroom. They're seeing people that look like they're in 1880s clothes appear in there. The daughter woke up with a room full of butterflies and moths so thick that she had to crawl on her hands and knees out. And on and on. But they talk about being taken a lot. And he talked about he had rheumatoid arthritis, and he's a construction guy. Doctor said, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. You quit moving, it's going to be bad. You keep moving like this, it's really bad. He talks about hearing these beings talk about considering financing, he said, a surgery for him or to repair him. He says, I got up off a table. I think I'm dreaming. They said, no. We're going to have to strap you down. And his rheumatoid arthritis is gone except for a little crick in his neck. Chris Bledsoe, Crohn's is gone. Another gentleman in South Florida talks about being taken against his will, head being drilled into, waking up in the hotel pillows, soaked with blood. And I don't mean the bloody nose, but pushing on it where bubbles come up and bruising on there. And so for those people, those experiencers, I have a harder time reconciling that they're actually physically having things happen to them. And I know you've had some guests that had some physical things happen. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think that the phenomenon really is non-physical only. I think there is a non-physical component to it that is underreported.
Yeah.
And it goes far back, as the cases go. But, we're just not comfortable discussing that quite yet. We have to wrap our minds around the fact that these entities might be real, and then we have to wrap our minds around the fact that non-physical things can also be real. And just because something's non-physical doesn't make it not real. And that's a really hard thing for people to sort of grok. When it comes to, a lot of the physical aspects, whether it's, scoop marks or whether it's the beings themselves or, whatever it may be, the instruments, I think about the crafts too. Some of these crafts appear to be physical constructs. And I would think that if you were some type of, to use Jacques Vallée's sort of theory of a control system, then yeah, you would have absolute free reign over reality as we know it. And that includes making things physical, and that includes making things non-physical, and that includes voices in your head, that includes ghosts, that includes all of the above. Everything we can observe would essentially be in their hands. And for whatever reason, you know, they need to do these things. Now, those reasons to me are unknown. Again, we don't really have an idea. We have ideas only about the motive, but they are so contradictory sometimes. And so, although we have similarities, especially when it comes to genetic procedures involving genitals or involving pregnancy, like that seems to be pretty prevalent. But then there are also so many different weird aspects to this stuff, like the scoop marks or like the drilling into someone's head or even having psychic surgery. And, you know, so, and then there's like different types of beings performing these things. But again, another pattern emerges. It seems like the small ones are, you know, taking your clothes off and cleaning up the urine because you're so scared or whatever. And then the taller ones are the ones doing the procedures, and the overseers are sometimes human or even mantid looking in the background, and they're wearing cloaks. Like it seems so strange. But it also doesn't rule out for me the idea that all of this might be constructed to make us feel a certain way. That although physical, very real and physical, that it might not be what it is. You know, we might be looking at whatever they need to do in order to fulfill whatever incomprehensible agenda that they have to deal with, and that we're just seeing it in the way that it's being sort of presented to us, but that's not at all what it really is. Like, for instance, you know, Carl Jung talks about how there are different archetypes psychologically that we associate things with. And fear, the archetype that, you know, that we associate fear with would be like a snake. And that goes back to being afraid of snakes and fearing them and being able to recognize a snake very, very quickly. We have this ability to recognize snakes very quickly. And so what if you were interacting with consciousness, this overseeing entity, this interdimensional, you know, thing, and it's going to instantiate to give you a message or something, but you're so afraid.
Yeah.
And so it physically forms into something that looks like a snake or a reptile or something that or a mantis being or something that you fear. But then it's giving you like loving intention, and you're just so confused at this, you know? So maybe that's it too. Maybe it has this manifesting property to it that is full on just reading our consciousness or our subconscious and putting it up there. Maybe we feel safer around human looking things, which is why, you know, Travis runs from these sort of amorphous, undescribable, gray, sort of generic being, and then encounters these like very handsome, tall, good-looking, trustworthy people. You know, maybe that's the reason that he saw that. I don't know, but I don't think. I mean, there's so many ways you can take this, because that might be true, but it could also be extraterrestrials at the same time, and they're, you know, I don't know. It's really confusing to say the least, but maybe by design. Yeah.
Well, let's do that. Let's build on that a little bit, because you were introducing consciousness into the conversation, and I know you've had experience at the Monroe Institute with consciousness, and a number of the guests I've had also. So I look at it again. The confusing part, or maybe the riddle or piece of the puzzle that you can comment on, is when you have people that you meet or that I've met and you talk to and you get past the BS meter and you look at, it becomes a human interest story to me. When I see a family, like your life, you could all be psychotic. You could all be doing this for whatever motives. I know it's not money. I look around, you don't have money, you're not making money, but yet you're impacted by this. And what you're telling me is, you're not inviting this into your life, that this is intruding into your world. And these other cases where it's more of an intrusion. But then with the advent and the development of us honing and fine-tuning and crafting our consciousness to where we can then make contact through that and develop that. And you talk to people, it's like, I wish I could quiet my mind enough to do that. And it sounds like you have, to some degree, or some experience with that. So what are your thoughts about consciousness being the tool if we're seeking them versus them seeking us?
Yeah, it might be the great sort of, it might be the thing that, sort of connects the two realms. I don't know that what we're experiencing when we have these sort of moments of contact in an altered state, I don't know that that is actually happening, or if it makes a difference whether it's happening or not, or if it's creating a reality. I don't have those answers. I know that from my own personal experience through having out-of-body experiences as they're described, that it is objectively different to me than having a lucid or vivid dream. I can tell the difference. And anybody who's had a lucid or vivid dream would know what that feels like and the difference between those two. And then if you have an sort of astral projection experience or anything of that sort, of that nature, what's described in Robert Monroe's books, if you have that happen to you, these vibratory senses and, all sorts of different symptoms, you realize that it is objectively different from having a vivid or lucid dream. I don't know if what I'm having is just a new type of dream that hasn't really been widely accepted. That could very well be too. But I also don't know that when I dream that isn't some other reality, and that we might be, that the sleep portion of our reality might indeed be more important than the awake portion. And for whatever reason, we seem to forget most of them. Like, I don't know that, but it does seem to me that if you look back through thousands of years of philosophy and great thinkers and great minds, that there is something to this consciousness interface, this interacting with entities, the purification of the body in order to facilitate that, or the quieting of the mind. Like, these principles exist through different cultures at different times for thousands of years. And so I'd have to think that, when you have people like Plato or Socrates or, discussing the mythos and the logos and like all the things that they're talking about seem to be, to them at the very least, extremely real and pertinent and important. And then, we're studying it differently now through the lens of a microscope, which may or may not be the right way to study it. But yeah, I think there is definitely something to it. And it seems like, again, like, I don't know what we're communicating with. I don't know if it's just a higher self. Is it our daimon? Is it some type of entity that is like a guide? Or is it a cloud of information that we all have access to? Or is it alien? Or is it us from the future? I don't know. But there does seem to be a dialogue. Like, when I tell people, I can go into a room that is devoid of any sensory input. So it's dark, it has no sound, it has no TV, no magazines, it has nothing in there. There is nothing for me to absorb and collect information from. Yet I can go into that room and an hour later I can come out seemingly knowing more than I did when I went in. And I go, where's that coming from? What is happening there that I have more information than when I went in, when there's nothing physical giving me any information, or non-physical seemingly, right?
All right.
So what is that? That tells me, oh, there's something here. There's something that we're accessing. I don't know what that is, but it does seem like, again, for thousands of years, we all thought this too.
Yeah. Man, you just put it so well. I got to tell you. You put it so well. And when you're describing that, it kind of made me go back to Bob Lazar, and I'll tell you why. We really haven't touched on the disclosure, right? And I know you've talked to people that talk about disclosure from maybe an insider's perspective, and I have too. And just to candidly, I'm not looking for the government to verify disclosure. I'm just not. I don't know that I would trust it anyway. I'm more interested in talking to people who in their eyes, disclosure has already happened, and I collect the bits of data from their eyes and help it complete my puzzle. But Bob's an anomaly in the sense that we're talking about a guy who, while not being an experiencer per se, is an experiencer with craft that is off Earth and actually hands-on. And the value of having someone like that be almost like the liaison between a lot of the things we're talking about, right? I just, did Bob have any thoughts about what we've just talked about, the consciousness, or maybe the deeper dive philosophically into what this could be or not be, when he's like, I was trying to get the engine fired up in this thing.
Yeah, not as far as I know. I think, again, he's very pragmatic, and he doesn't speculate. He doesn't enjoy speculating.
Okay.
You can tell he doesn't like that because to someone, I think, who's as sort of left-brained as he is, it's a nuisance and a waste of time almost to be like, perhaps he does have deep philosophical, thoughts. And I just wasn't privy to any of those. But to me, it seemed like he's just very pragmatic, somebody who's like, give me the information. He's an engineer. He has an engineering mind, and he's able to build things when given certain variables and parts. And that's what he's trying to do. That's what I gathered.
Okay. And when I look at other people that are more science-minded, and again, you brought up a great point. These are all just pieces of the puzzle that I'm using the data to put somewhere in my little puzzle box, right? And see what picture that I'm creating. But I had a few of the technologists that's on The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, and the archaeologist, and both of them very different backgrounds. Both of them approached in interesting ways about coming on the show to use their expertise. Both of them eyes rolling when they heard about what is it? They both were like, well, one guy heard about it. The archaeologist lived in Utah, but he was like, so yeah, I mean, I know there's a book and all that. So what's going on? And for him, it was more, he had this cool point. The land, he wasn't even on camera until they started drilling because they needed him to go through the spoils of what they're drilling in the mesa. He was out there for a couple years before that just doing archaeology work. And what he found was, through the layers of archaeology, was people have been coming here to this area for thousands of years. And there's no reason for them to come here. Like this wouldn't be where ancient settlers would settle because of the criteria that ancient settlers would settle. But yet they kept coming here like it was an attraction. And then on the technology side, he was approached, and again, eyes rolling, and he went out there day one, and he's flying this super expensive drone, and he kind of he's got Eric, the chief scientist, next to him, and he's got his drone up, and he's like, sees a glint out of the corner of his eye, and he's like, there's like this steel thing hovering way up there. And he's like, Derek, what is that? And Eric's got his FAA flight tracker. I don't know, man. That's what we see out here. And he's got, drone quits. Right when that happens, drone quits, thing takes off, his drone circle of death down to the crashes, and he pulls the GPS data. And for him, 6 years later, he's like, GPS is synchronized with these satellites by time. And his theory is developing is like somehow time's being manipulated here. And he had a lot of criteria as why. Whereas the archaeologist is like, I've never seen one thing in the sky. everything I see is anomalous and it's blowing my mind that I'm pulling out of the mesa, but I don't see things in the sky. And it kind of goes back to like this phenomena may want you to see what it wants you to see, or functionality wise want you to see or experience what you experience. So yeah, it's I find it, again, it just had more questions for me than answers.
Yeah. And it's easy to measure things that are physical or that appear on instruments, but the phenomenon might also be synchronicity.
Yeah.
Or epiphanies, these eureka moments, or, they might instantiate in dreams. It might be all of the above. It might be a war starting, who knows? Maybe there's a reason there. Like, there is no, we're so myopic in how we view things because we only have this one little lifetime to view things in, seemingly. And we only have the instruments, and we're restricted geographically and to the instruments that we have and to this instrument, the human body and our senses. And it's such a small part of the whole that we're observing. And, we're different people talking about different parts of the elephant.
Yeah.
And then trying to piece it together and coming up with some giant monster that's hideous, but it doesn't look like an elephant. It's just really tough to do that. And so if this is some type of intelligence, which it does seem to be, it does seem to act very intelligently. It seems to act like it's 10 steps ahead. And so, observing it might not get us anywhere. I don't know. It's still not going to stop me from trying to observe it. Right. But it seems like, hey, the closer you look, the weirder it gets. And that might be by design.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. So you've made the dive for a number of years deep into the UFO subject, this phenomena that we're talking about. Have your personal experiences, let me ask you like this. Have you had personal experiences with what you believe to be the phenomena? And do you believe that maybe you could attribute it to your conscious effort to dive into looking and investigating and talking about the phenomena?
Yeah, I've had really meaningful synchronicity, synchronous moments happen at very, very important sort of times that I listened to and effectively changed, my course several times and were responsible for some major life decisions, So I attribute that to the phenomenon. When I had those out of body experiences, right after meeting Joe McMoneagle, I didn't know what they were. They happened to me. There's two of them that just happened. I didn't know anything about this stuff. And when it happened, I was Googling furiously afterwards and finding out that, these are symptoms that people have when they leave their body. And I was really, really shaken, and brought me to buying the book, Journeys Out of the Body, and eventually going to Monroe, being the first to document the gateway process, and meeting a bunch of amazing people there that I'm still in contact with, including Ryan Bledsoe and so many others. Then going home, documenting it, having it happen again through meditation, which then opens and broadens my perspective to what this is and what it is we're dealing with. And so I have to think that it's all sort of part of the phenomenon. Everything is part of the phenomenon, and just we're really honing in on the physical components of it because it seems to be easier to measure. But I'm not, I'm kind of open to the phenomenon presenting itself in many, many, many ways, many different ways. And if you listen to all the high strangeness, it can be a download, or it can be something in the sky, or it can be a passage in a book that hits you, or a stranger that whispers something, or a song in a dream that you end up writing, and it ends up changing the world. Or it's so vast and so multifaceted. I'm trying as hard as I can not to pigeonhole myself into this is alien or this is this or this is that. Although I would love to be given a confirmation on any of those things, and I'd be happy to, make that my entire belief system. It just doesn't seem like it's the case. It just doesn't seem that way. I would love it to be neat. But again, I think it is purposefully very confusing and very vast.
When you said vast, something popped into my head and phenomena. Sometimes I think, this morning it hit me, a galactic year, galaxy, takes 200 to 250 million years to make a complete turn. Yet we base our time around, going around the sun in a year, right? And then I thought about the just absolute vastness of the universe. It's incomprehensible for us. And then I think about it, what if we're the phenomena? That's why they're attracted to us. They've got a way that is so outside of our physics, outside of our consciousness, but it's much more common in the universe than we are. Therefore, we're the phenomena.
Yeah, I'm not against thinking that as well, but I also feel like if we're gonna make that case, I go to, okay, what are we trying to do right now? We're trying to, leave the planet, potentially go to Mars and beyond and sort of become an interplanetary species in hopes of leaving the solar system and becoming sort of an intergalactic species, or at least a space-faring species that is able to preserve the seed of consciousness throughout the galaxy, the universe. Like that, it seems to be the ultimate goal, right? This planet isn't going to be here forever. Right. We hope to be in some capacity. And so if I was billions of years more advanced, so I had a head start by 1 billion or 2 years, I would potentially have already developed the capacity to bounce around the universe at free will, right? Just like literally bounce around wherever I wanted to at the flip of a dime, and it costs no energy. Let's just assume that, right?
Okay.
Through this technological upward trajectory that I'm now here, I can do these things. And I would instantly map out, I guess, trillions of exoplanets. I don't know. There's probably a massive number there, but like so many exoplanets. I think there's something like 40 billion in our galaxy alone that have water, signs of water. So those might all be potential for at least primitive life. So you map out all these trillions and trillions of exoplanets, and you want to preserve the seed, right? But you don't want to, you can't live there, because all these planets, although they're, they have their own variation of life or whatever they are, they're not perfect for you. The nitrogen levels are off, the radiation levels are off. They're just not perfect. The gravity, oxygen, whatever, the allergens, the plants. Something's going to be off to where you have to live in a suit or live underground or in a bubble. It's not ideal. So instead, it might be more plausible that you just find primitive life that already exists on these planets and that are thriving, and that you then all you have to do is kind of, genetically modify them to put your DNA into it and then monitor it for, thousands of years. I would also think that if you're going to do this, that you wouldn't be doing it yourself. That you're now bouncing around the universe of free will. You also have obviously developed AI. In fact, it might be all that's left of your civilization. It might have outlived any biological component that created it. But you'll send out this system throughout the universe to potentially, through some type of channeled panspermia or von Neumann sort of probe, drop them in the oceans, and these things will be self-replicating, they will be self-sustaining, and they'll keep the homeostasis rhythm of all these planets in check. And then maybe they'll start exchanging life and manipulating life from planet to planet and bringing, let's grab the zebras from over here and modify them and bring them here, and grab the cephalopods and bring them, and creating this petri dish throughout the universe. And if that's the case, what we might be dealing with is simply some ancient system that's here that we're able to, quote unquote, summon, interact with, that gets triggered when nuclear bombs start going off, that comes to shut down these silos, but that's also triggered equally from the opposite side of the spectrum through love, intention, meditation, and, deep inner peace. And so there might be a system that we're interacting with. That system might be an intelligence that to us might seem like God because it's so far advanced, but it might be there just to help preserve life in the universe and preserve consciousness. So if I was these species also, I would be living in space. I wouldn't be living here. So time, we talked about time wouldn't be relevant really. It would be very different in a spaceship. You wouldn't have, Earth rotations. And so days would be vastly different. But you could essentially maybe create a little gravitational density around your craft to have time speed up on these planets. And so maybe you're seeding the galaxy or the universe within an afternoon. Yeah. Maybe I'm abducting somebody, tinkering on them, letting them go, hitting the fast forward button in my spaceship, and now doing the same to their children. Maybe I'm dropping metallurgy and I don't know, all these other amazing things, I don't know, irrigation or whatever, science. And then I fast forward 1,000 years and I come back and I give them religion. And then I fast forward 1,000 years and I come back and I give them the next component, which sort of, creates these coherent societies around the universe, all these ingredients that they've been dropping in. I don't know. I'm just trying to picture it in this anthropomorphic way of like, how would I go about it if I had all of this at my disposal? What would that look like? And so I think it would look like a system. I don't think they would be doing it individually. And if they are, it's hard for me to believe that they're just doing it to us, that there isn't a trillion other examples of this.
Yeah, man. Quite a picture you painted. And producer Ryan back there is going, wow. but man, you pieced that together. That was really cool. That was really cool. The whole system. And put it this way, what the picture you just painted would explain a lot more than it wouldn't explain to me. And I know,
especially the grays, the nondescript grays that are, that don't seem to have any kitchens in their spaceship,
right?
Or any genitals or anything. They're just kind of like task oriented.
Yeah.
Maybe made to spec, discarded, ephemeral. Just to do the job, to make sure that life thrives everywhere. And then who knows? Maybe there is this moment in time where there is this the prime directive, like in Star Trek. In Star Trek, it was when people developed warp drive. To us, that might be the equivalent of nuclear energy. Yeah. But the prime directive might not be developing nukes. It might be disarming them and throwing them out. And, and then maybe, through this loving intention, because we do seem to be able to interact with this stuff in very calm, loving states. Maybe that's the other thing that trips the wire, other than catastrophe. Maybe the other thing that tripped the wire is this sort of collective loving intention. And then maybe they just come down and they're like, hey, welcome to the family. What took you so long? You know what I mean? Yeah. And then the intelligence behind the system ends up showing itself.
Man, that is a vision. So let's do this. Before we wrap, I wanted to get your thoughts on a couple things. So you talked with Chris, I've talked with Chris, and we hear it throughout. And again, I'm not going to judge anybody, whether, not naming names, the people out there that we might think are, they've been saying things for years and maybe these things haven't transpired. Does it mean they're grifters? I don't know. But the dates coming up, do you see any significance in a shift in consciousness upcoming?
I don't know. it's hard because these things happen a lot over time. They do happen time and time again. We end up dealing with a lot of predictions, especially in this space. So we can piece together things to retrofit a prediction pretty easily with the amount of information we have access to. That being said, it does also seem like we are hitting a breaking point on so many different fronts, in that there is a boiling point happening. There is some type of critical mass that's occurring, whether it's AI, whether it's the economy, whether it's geopolitical sort of tension, whether it's the environment, whether it's UFOs. It seems like we're peaking on so many fronts that as soon as one goes, they all go. And how long can you peak for before it's enough? I don't know. Have we been peaking for 80 years? Or is now the time, like it certainly feels imminent, It certainly feels that way. I think a lot of people would feel that way as well about, everything sort of culminating. This is the end of the Roman Empire. Yeah. And, we've had our fun, but it does feel like that, not to be a doomer, but it does feel that way. And so when you hear predictions coming from people who I believe, especially with Chris's case, had an experience initially, there were multiple witnesses, something happened. Now you take that and you take all the other experiencers that are also delivering this devastating, shocking news that like there's something going to happen unless we do something. Take all that plus what we have going on. It definitely seems like something's going to happen. I can say that now. Am I going to put all my chips in? Not quite yet. I didn't do it in 2012 or on Y2K, and I won't do it now, but I definitely think there is something happening, and it'll certainly be interesting to see what happens, regardless of the outcome. But yeah, I don't, let's say I was something spoke into my head that I was convinced was something else. And it said, hey, 2027 is the thing. It's going to happen, whatever is happening. This will happen, this will happen. And it said that into my head, or my coffee started talking to me, grew a mouth and it started talking to me, right? I would be inclined to believe everything it says, because it just showed me that my reality was a lie and that this is the new truth. And so I'm going to be inclined to believe a voice in my head or something impossible delivering a message. Whether that thing happens or it doesn't happen, I think I'd still want to tell people what I was told.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I see it. Now, is this a trickster element? Right. Are we shifting timelines? I don't know. I have no idea. I know that Chris he's got a good heart. I know that from, spending time with his family. Beyond that, I don't know. I don't know the motive here. I don't know anything further.
Yeah. And I will clarify this with Chris. He sent me years ago, I was having this intuition around Easter, and I reached out to him about it. And he's like, yeah, light's coming. And I wake up Easter morning and he sends me this orb and his family there. So with Chris and Emma, I have no doubt that they're doing that. With the lady thing, like you said, I don't know. But when I get to the Stephen Greer side of the fence, I'm a little more skeptical because for a number of reasons. So those are the extremes that I was talking about. So we'll just wait and see. Because then my wife, she's not into this. But her and my kids have to suffer through my theories and suffer through the guests I talk about and suffer me talking about Chris Ramsay and Area 52. And when I talk about, I was talking with Chris and, Easter 2026. And they're like, are we going to paint Easter eggs or not? Or is the world ending? I'm like, no. It's a shift in consciousness. And Emily talked about that she feels it's more of a shift in consciousness, and you touched on it. Like, well, maybe we are moving towards a trigger point, and maybe that's one of them. It's something to look for. and see, right? So it's all interesting, and there's no tidy way to wrap this up and say, well, Chris, what do you think this is? We've been spending the whole time talking about what we don't know what it is, but the consideration. So we'll wrap there. But what I wanted to do is also a couple things. I've steered hundreds of people to your channel just because for me it's the gold standard. There's a lot of people that have Jesse, love Jesse's channel, UFO Gerb, love. These are great contributors to the content. But you've got this gift to encapsulate the whole of the phenomena with your guests, with your read-throughs. That is just wonderful. I have a buddy that makes films and not into the subject. I said, check this guy out. He just simply texts me back. He just said, this is gold. And so a credit to you. And also for people, if you haven't, subscribe to Area 52. If you don't know who he is, you probably shouldn't even be watching this podcast, but do yourself a favor, subscribe to Area 52. You're welcome. The other thing I will say is we tried to have Chris on when I first started this channel, which is growing like a weed thanks to you viewers, and our internet didn't work. I had Chris on, it was sketchy, and it cut out. And I thought, okay, well, there you go. There was your chance and you blew it. But Chris was gracious enough to stay in contact anytime I reach out to schedule this. So not only is he the gold standard, in my opinion, for this content, but one of the nicest guys generally you'll ever meet. So I just want to, again, thank you very much for giving us the time. And until we meet again.
Thank you so much, James. And thank you for allowing me to, riff on your platform. And thank you to your viewers for listening this far. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. We'll talk soon.